Hi, everyone. Sorry to have eaten into your movement break. I'm Sally Munemitsu, co-founder. As you saw from the photo, I clearly have COVID hair. Haven't cut my hair in a few years here. Happy to be home in Southern California. I am a native of North San Diego County, so thank you for the great weather. I also want to share that I'm a former middle school teacher. So I know that the class after lunch, you guys all had food coma. So I was hoping you had a little bit of a break. I'm glad you got to stand up and at least take that photo. But no, in terms of brain science, we know how much movement matters, and I know you've been sitting in those chairs being so attentive. So thank you. I promise you it'll be worth your time to pay attention. We have a great lineup of panelists here today talking about building social-emotional skills through sports. So I'm Sally Munemitsu. I'm one of the co-founders at Hello Insight, and we have an online platform that has research-based surveys, but more importantly, it provides real-time feedback to frontline staff, organizations, et cetera. But more importantly, what we do with that data is help do community building, but especially field building. So very excited to help us all think about social-emotional learning and that research to practice, but back from practice to research. And so as we ask all of you as coaches and frontline staff to think about meeting your young people where they're at, that's exactly what I've challenged my panel to do today. We've been sitting in to so many great sessions all morning, early afternoon, and thinking about what was already being said and what more can we add to the story. So I'm gonna pop up a slide and ask folks to raise your hand if you feel that sports does build these kinds of assets in young people. So a raise of hands. Great. That's what we've been feeling all morning, is that everyone's been talking about such great stories, personal stories of being involved in sports and knowing how much that has benefited a young person personally. There are many terms on that slide because it's been out there. And so I know that SEL, social emotional learning, has been talked about so much more related to COVID. All of us know how much young people have been hurting, adults have been hurting, so social emotional learning is not just about young people, it's about all people. And so as we think about how our young people, we can serve them, a lot of great conversation this morning has really talked about how can we help the adults helping young people. And so with that then, I would love to turn to my panel and have them introduce themselves. And there we have some nuances of social emotional learning on the board, and talk a little bit about what you think about it. I'll start, yep.
Sure. Hi, I am Meredith Whitley. I'm an associate professor at Adelphi University in New York City. And I am a former member of the President's Council of Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition Science Board. Yeah, I think I'll just turn it over to my colleague.
Hi, I'm Amy Cranston. I'm from SEL for California, which is the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for California. If you haven't heard of us, please check us out and join. It doesn't cost anything. We don't sell anything. It's just a membership network of like-minded people that believe that SEL really needs to be the cornerstone of our education system.
Hi, I'm Bella Gonzalez. I'm with the LA84 Foundation and was a water polo coach for about 10 years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elmer Roldan. I'm the Executive Director of Communities and Schools of Los Angeles. We're an organization that provides social-emotional support, case management, and wraparound services to students in 14 schools across 5 neighborhoods in LAUSD, including South Los Angeles, Watts, Boyle Heights, Pico Union, and parts of West Los Angeles. Pleasure.
Thank you. Great. So the topic is building social emotional skills through sports. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the research we've done at Hello Insight. We have a national data set of young people who've been in sports and out of sports. And so with the support of great, we talked about earlier in the coalition session about great partners throughout the country. So Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative was up here. LADF is here in the room. So many great partners across the country have started to help us build a data set of young people involved in sports. We were then able to compare young people's SEL development, those that did sports and those that didn't. And using your QR code, you can find that report online. And we learned, of course, as you all well know, sports does build social emotional learning. And we saw that sports does build social emotional learning more, as you probably all understand. But what was interesting in the data that we found was that actually it's great across most young people, but it's actually not as great for young girls, at least in our data set. And so that's where we're thinking about how do you lean in and support young girls in this process of building social emotional learning. I'll be asking the panelists in a second about how more the practical ways they do so. And the other piece that I know we're really all interested in is the equity aspect. And so one of the things that we were able to find was that your ethnicity did not matter when we were looking at the sports data. That in our national data set around social emotional learning, that actually race was a predictor when you didn't do sports. But when you did do sports, race was not a predictor. And so I'd love to be able to ask my panelists a little bit about that too. So we have the data that really proves out that SEL is being built by social emotional, by sports in this space. And so I really want to challenge my panel here to sort of talk more deeply about what they've seen about that. So I'd love to start with Amy, because she's in the larger statewide perspective as well as in schools. How are you seeing social emotional learning being displayed and taught?
Especially with regard to equity as well.
Sure.
So I don't know if everyone's familiar with CASEL, Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. So they're kind of the think tank of SEL. They're based in Chicago. And they recently actually changed their definition of SEL, and it was pretty like minor changes, but really important ones. And so they call it transformative SEL now. And basically what that is just with an equity lens, right? And for the collective good, right? So not just building personal, individual strengths, but kind of more of a community, collective approach, and always with that lens of equity.
Great. And then Elmer, would love to have you chat a little bit more specifically since you're in the day-to-day school environment.
Yeah. Well, for us, the way that it shows up is in the type of programming that we do. So this past year, we saw that students showed up to schools feeling really anxious, really agitated, and really disconnected from their peers and adults. And so we use sports as part of a menu of our curriculum, which included active participation. Once COVID regulations started to get lax and folks were able to interact with one another. So we had, across the year, we had competitions where around Super Bowl time, there was competitions between staff and students. We also had a St. Valentine's relay. We had these on Thursdays we would do a walk it, talk it events where you would literally just walk in a circle and check in with students to find out how they were doing. We had yoga for our staff as well as parents and students, mindful meditation sessions, and a number of other activities like that. Some of our schools have cheerleading and drill team, courses, and so we utilize those. And then the other thing we did is we also encouraged students to get off social media by using days when we would be doing activities, including board games. So anything that would help them sort of disconnect from social media, which was a big contributor to the early stages of anxiety and a lot of the behavioral challenges that we saw occurring on campuses in the early stages of returning back to schools.
Thank you. And then Meredith, I know you've done such great research specifically related to sports. Can you talk a little bit more about that then?
Sure. Goodness. I mean, I think if we keep it super practical and we think about, I think we're all, as you've said, believers here, and the potential for sport to do incredible good and to help kids learn social and emotional skills and attitudes. But I think the key point there is if and when, right? And so, a lot of my research and the work of others has highlighted the importance of being really intentional with making sure that you are cultivating an environment that supports kids, that supports their learning and their growth and their development, and that engages them in that process. Yeah. And so I think for me, I often find myself coming back to kind of 3 tenets of what good sport is. And I think the first is that intentionality piece. And that doesn't mean that everything has to be super structured.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that, kids, if the setting is there, if they have access to those play spaces, sometimes it's adults stepping away and letting the kids develop those social and emotional skills through play and through figuring out, how to create fair teams and how to figure out, how to process wins and losses and do so without adults jumping in, right? Yeah. So I think that first piece, though, is that intentionality, whether it's something that is unstructured or something that is structured. I think second, especially when they're structured activities, making sure that the social and emotional learning is integrated into the activity itself, right? And I think, Elmer, you referred to that, right? This idea of active learning, of really making sure that, the social and emotional learning or the life skills that you're teaching, this youth development side, isn't just kids sitting in seats listening, right? Then you're losing this incredible tool that is sport, right? Kids are there, they're engaged, they're invested in their learning and their growth and their development. And so you can't separate those out. And so I think the more opportunities that you can get to integrate that learning into the physical activity itself, the more impactful it is. And then third, teaching for transfer or coaching for transfer. I think a lot of times we often assume that what we learn in the sports setting, makes for incredible, transfer into all these other different domains. But what we've seen through the research and through practice and from coaches and practitioners sharing with us is that you have to be really intentional with that transfer piece. Yeah. You have to help kids think about what they're learning in the sports setting, how that transfers in the other domains. You have to help them prepare to do that transfer, to practice it, to reflect on it, and figure out what to do differently next time. So I think it just takes practice and intentionality.
Thank you. And then we have fortunate to have Bella with us today. And I know we just heard from the panelists of great young people and how social emotional learning and just the impacts of sports were very evident for them. But we have an opportunity here to also learn from Bella, who is on the team here for the Play Equity Fund in LA84. I'd love to hear your story and share with folks how social emotional learning was actually a key component of how you've been able to be here with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I like to say playing water polo allowed me to find my flavor as a person. I think it's really important, like Meredith is saying, to create an environment where athletes feel like they can not only, learn how to communicate, collaborate, but also how to fail, how to experience loss. And that playing water polo from a young age as an outsider when I was in middle school, going to a new school far away, 20 miles away from my house, not knowing anyone, and being in a sport where not a lot of Latinas were participating, being able to express myself and having a supportive coaching environment allowed me to find my flavor and my strength and identify how to continue to grow in development as a person. And I'm reflecting as an adult now, and from my coaching experiences, seeing the benefits of those experiences through water polo.
Thank you for that. One of the things that in reflection of today, we wanted to really share back with you all in terms of building SEL through sports. How is that actually done? And so there's a great practicality when we're looking at research to practice and practice back to research. So I'm wondering from each of you in the panel here, is there a practical tip or a method or one of your favorite your own ways that you help your own young people develop social and emotionally? Is there something that you want to share with folks? I'll start down there with Elmer first.
Well, I think for us, it was about finding tools to get students to feel connected once again, not only with our teams, but also with the schools. And it's something that I think young people, especially in our communities, are especially resilient because they learn how to navigate various crises, right? The pandemic is only the latest in a string of crises that our communities have experienced. I live in South Los Angeles, and if you look at just the last 50 years, every decade there's some crisis that our community is facing. Going back to the 70s, massive unemployment. During the 80s, we had the crack cocaine epidemic. In the 90s, you had massive unemployment again, followed by immigration issues. And then in the 2000s, you had people getting the foreclosure impacting them, immigration rates kicking up again. And then wealth and income inequality are things that we have seen happen over the last 2 decades, and then welcome the pandemic. And so I think for us, it was about finding, again, ways that young people feel reconnected back to their schools and the institutions that they felt abandoned by when the pandemic shut everything down. And so certainly movement, it was a big deal because on top of everything else that I listed, our communities don't have a lot of open spaces where our young people are able to move. Often schools were the only sites where there was green spaces, where there was tracks or whatever other spaces they had to move around. And so when those things shut down, you had folks confined to close quarters, sometimes cooped up with multiple generations of families or multiple families in some cases. And so it was about sort of welcoming students back into open spaces. It was about helping them see that they weren't competing to try to win some type of trophy, but rather that it was a way for them to reconnect with themselves and with their peers and staff. And so for us, we found it really useful because in a way it was liberating for them to be able to step out into the world and find through these different efforts how to sort of find their voice once again, but also find their place in the schools as well as the community.
Thanks, Elmer. And then for Bella, what was some of your coaching experience? Because you've done both. You've been coached and you've been coaching others. What are some of the tips and tricks that you have about supporting young people's, the safe environment from which SEL develops, but how you sort of monitor that process and really support young people where they're at?
Yeah, I think it's really important to embrace differences and that you can't look at an athlete with trying to achieve the same skill sets, right? And that embracing these differences and looking at it is like we're all different puzzle pieces, and then we're able to make our own type of puzzle piece together. And that's something that I experienced as an athlete with my supportive coaching staff, is that they didn't look at us all as the same person trying to achieve the same goals. They looked at who we were as people, what type of person we were, and how we would work together as a team. And I think then moving on into through a coaching lens of really approaching an athlete not the same way that I might approach Sally, but then thinking about who Amy was, how am I going to communicate with her? How am I going to move forward to be able to make sure that we're understanding what we're trying to achieve as a community and as one unit? And so I think in our differences, that's where we'll find strength and embracing that.
Thank you. And Amy, I know you've seen so much difference all across the state related to SEL, but where do you see sport really shining, and is there particular ways in which SEL is really, just being highlighted by SBYD, sports-based youth development?
Well, I've always said that sports is the no-brainer of SEL, right?
Yeah.
Because it's what you do anyways. It's what we do, and coaches are naturals at it. I think where Meredith was talking about kind of those three things about creating the environment, being intentional, and transference. So what we mean by that is sometimes you need to connect the dots for them, right? So you want to connect the dots about how these skills, traits, characteristics that they're learning in sports transfer, right, into other aspects of their life, into adulthood, into the workforce. The students that were on earlier, right, they had connected the dots. I don't know if they figured that out for themselves or somebody helped them figure that out, but they had connected the dots. They had already seen how what they learned through sports was going to benefit them in other aspects of their life and in adulthood. So I think that's kind of a really important piece of it.
Is there something you've seen that really is that practical tip for folks to take away? Like, how do you teach transfer? How do you really emphasize the intentionality piece?
I think it's just the connecting the dots piece,
Yeah.
right? By taking that moment to say, okay, now see what we just learned here. Now, how would that, come into play in another area of your life, right? So I think it's just taking that moment to sort of connect the dots for them.
Right. And so one of the things that I took notes on earlier today was really about the importance of coaches. And we talked a lot all morning about mental health, and mental health was on that list related to social emotional learning, and how sports is a vehicle from which to build social emotional learning, to build mental health, to build all those developmental assets. And Meredith has a great statistic about how many more coaches there are than licensed mental health care workers. And someone in the morning session had a great term that I love around mental health first aid kit. So I was wondering, Meredith, if you can talk a little bit about how the practicality of each of you out there who are working with young people, how you can help build that, be that first level of support of young people.
Sure. So that stat is that there are about 1.2 million mental health professionals across the country, but there are over 6.5 million coaches. So just think about that potential, right? And I think it speaks to, perhaps how we need to change not just how we're training coaches, which we've heard a lot about today, and there's certainly been that theme running across, but I think also how we value coaches. And to me, it comes back to a little bit of that argument of, if we value students and young people learning so much, then we need to value the teachers more, right? I think the same can be said for coaches as well. And one practical point is, can we make this a career where coaches who are great at it, who've gotten this incredible training, who are really transforming lives each and every day, it doesn't just become a living wage, which it is not right now, but it becomes far beyond that, such that they are paid what they deserve, and they're more likely to stay in this career if they choose to, and have incredible impact over a long period of time. When I think right now, many of these incredible people doing such important work, the most important work, are having to choose to make different decisions at certain points because they don't feel the support that they need.
Thank you. And so for those of you, thank you, Meredith, for that. The words that we put up on the board earlier around social emotional learning, mental health, overall well-being, so also being in the space of fundraising and funding out there, and that advocacy piece that we've been talking a lot about today. So I know we talked earlier about pay for play versus sports. I think that term of you're either in it for the young people and their full development, or you're not. It doesn't matter whether you're for-profit or not. I think this concept of we are trying to do youth development. So that notion of sports-based youth development is also all about social emotional learning. So we hope that you can see, and we heard it all day long today, that sports is about great youth development. So when you go for looking at fundraising and funding streams, talk about your great youth development work, and that sports is also there as a great hook, as a way to also do health and wellness. And so as everyone's been saying today, it's such a great catch-all, wonderful opportunity for all of our young people, and it's such a great holistic way. So with that, I want to thank the panel for your great insights here. The QR code is up on the board. All of their research and websites are on there, so thank you very much.
Thank you.